Hey everyone, I hope you are doing well. We've been going through 4th edition as though it were just released and looking at Keep on the Shadowfell. We've been going through the player's handbook and looking at all the different things that we've seen so far with an eye towards we don't have any of the later information and we haven't heard any of the noise about 4th edition. And so we're forming our own opinions about how you play the game and what's in the game and, you know, deciding whether or not it's the right game for us and what we like and maybe what we don't like and things. Been having a lot of fun with that. But today this video is going to be a little different. We're not going to be looking at any of the content from those books. What I want to do is put on my 4th edition Defender hat and respond to some of the stuff that I saw when I was looking through some of the old reviews for Keep on the Shadowfell and looking at some of the comments that came in on some of those videos. And they're all good comments. They're perfectly fine. With folks that maybe don't necessarily agree with 4th edition the same way that we do. They didn't necessarily care for Keep on the Shadowfell, and that's perfectly fine. Everybody has their own opinions and they're constructive, which is great. But I do want to respond to them as a 4th edition apologist, if you will, because I have some thoughts about this one series of comments or thoughts about this adventure in particular, and some of it translates to a common theme you hear about 4th edition, and so I want to dig into that a little bit. So while going through Keep on the Shadowfell, I saw these comments that talked about how the adventure was just a combat slog. It was just this grind where every room had these monsters and there was no opportunity to do anything else. You just had to go from one combat encounter, you fight the monsters, you leave, go to the next room and there's just more monsters. You go to the next room and there's just more monsters. And I thought this was interesting because I had a few thoughts on it. And so I wanted to kind of go through my thought process as I read through these and was thinking about it. Because, when you look at the adventure, I could understand why you would see that. But I had some things I was thinking about. First of all, I don't necessarily understand why this is a surprise, because if you had been around at the time that 4th edition was coming out, you would have seen the announcement about it and they talked about what they were doing. They had the 2 Wizards Presents books where they talked about their mindset and some of the stuff that they were doing as they tried to come up with this new version and where they were coming from with it. And it was pretty clear that combat was something they really wanted to focus on, that they wanted to make combat more interesting and provide tools for the dungeon master and the players to make combat more interesting. So it shouldn't be a surprise to somebody who then, when this first module for 4th edition is released, to find that there's a lot of combat in there, because that is something they really wanted to emphasize in this game. And I don't want to in any way say that 4th edition is nothing but combat, because it absolutely is not. But at the same time, they did put a lot of focus on it. And so it is an important part of 4th edition and the way that it was implemented to make the combat more interesting for everybody. So naturally, you would expect that the adventure they release would have a lot of combat, so that inside those different rooms that you go through, it's not just here's another room with a bunch of monsters, but there's different types of terrain that you have to work with. There's different types of cover that you have to factor in. There's hazards. There's lots of different types of monsters, all the different powers that you have for the players to work with each other. So it's all designed for the players to be able to try out their different character abilities in different situations. And I feel like if they didn't do that, if they didn't provide all those different situations for the players to try out their characters and all their different abilities and powers, then you probably would have people complaining that this opening adventure for 4th edition missed an opportunity because it didn't provide these opportunities for the players to actually use the real core of the game and what made it special. So you probably can't win with that one, but I feel like from that aspect, yeah, okay, the fact that it has a lot of combat is probably what they wanted to do, because you want to show off the thing that made this game special. This was the big deal. Let's talk about that one. The next thing that I want to look at is, kind of then looking at the adventure as a whole. So the whole notion that this is just this slog where it's just this dungeon crawl and you just got one combat after the other. Well, I mean, let's take a look at the adventure as a whole. And so I'm gonna flip over to my other screen real quick. And I'll back up. I've got it on the first level of the keep, but let's take this all the way back to the beginning of the adventure. And, we've got the setup for it. And then, it talks about just really kind of the hooks and how to play the game. And then you get into the quick start rules. But then when you get into the actual adventure, it's like, okay, your first encounter is a little combat encounter. And it is really not much different from what you get in a lot of adventures. Your first encounter is that hook to really pull you in, some sort of quick combat that lets the players try out some of their character stuff and sets the stage for whatever's going to come next. So this is not at all unusual for a D&D published adventure. And what's the next thing you do? Well, you go to a town and you explore this town, and you have multiple pages talking about the different locations in this town and the people that you can talk to and the information that you could get from these people, including several different side quests that are out there. And those side quests might help you learn more about what's going on around here. And it gives you information about how to answer the different questions and stuff. So you right off the bat, you only had one combat encounter, and now you've got a whole role-playing, exploration, social encounter thing that you get to do. And just like with any other adventure, then when you're setting off and going towards these side quests, the DM can decide whatever happens as you're traveling to these locations, and you can have other encounters that come up. This is pretty standard for an adventure in Dungeons and Dragons, that you fill in some of the spaces with other things if you want. Or you can go right to the encounters as published here. And so then you get an ambush encounter that you can insert in any number of places while they're playing out this adventure. And then you've got some of these side quest ones that you were given by doing the role playing inside the town to kind of move the story forward and get you to the next part of the story. And you're doing these things. And then where do you go? Well, you go back to the town. And you go back and you talk to those people again. You do more social encounters. You do more walking around the town and maybe settling in a tavern or the inn and just socializing with folks and learning more about what's going on. And it has more stuff where you can interact with the NPCs. So again, you're not into just combat everywhere. You are doing the types of things you might find in another type of adventure. And then you do get to the keep. Eventually you make your way into the keep, and then this is the dungeon crawl. Now you're going to go in, there's all these different rooms, and you work your way through these things, and there's stuff that happens in these rooms. And so I think then, so by looking at the adventure as a whole, it's like, okay, well, the adventure as a whole is not just this slog. It's not like this was chapter 1 and it's like, okay, you're at the front door of this keep, good luck, and you just start battling your way through the keep. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in this adventure before you get into the dungeon crawl portion of it. And this is not much different from other adventures that came before it, like Temple of Elemental Evil or Keep on the Borderlands or Lost City. There's other stuff that happens, and then you get into the dungeon crawl. Really no different than what you see in Keep on the Shadowfell. So that was my second thought about this, and I don't know why 4th edition has to be held to some different standard, that this adventure is somehow different from something else that came before it. So that was my thought with that one. Then I was wanting to look at what a dungeon crawl is on its own. So a dungeon crawl is typically an adventure where the party is going through some kind of grind. So they go down into a dungeon and they're having to explore it. They're having to find something or rescue someone or do something down in this dungeon. And getting through this dungeon is a grind. And every turn is some sort of new challenge that they have to face in this dungeon. And to kind of think about this, I decided to go back and look at some other adventures. Now, I've been telling myself that I'm not going to compare 4th edition to other adventures because, it stands on its own. But I do feel that in this case, I wanted to just take a peek and say, is 4th edition different from what you would get in other adventures in Dungeons and Dragons? And so I went back and I pulled out Temple of Elemental Evil, and I was looking and see, what do you get when you're looking at the different rooms in the Temple of Elemental Evil? And I just kind of scrolled into the book and I was looking and I was like, okay, well, you've got all these different rooms, and in them you've got rats, you've got ghasts, you've got ghouls, you've got more ghouls, more gas. I thought I saw some owl bears in here somewhere, gnolls here. So you skeletons, very similar in that you've got all these locations and they all have these monsters in them. And so here's, if this looks very much like a grind to me. I mean, if we start in the kitchen, we've got snakes, very next room, gnolls, very next room, more gnolls, very next room, gnolls and hobgoblins, very next room, ogres, very next room, skeletons, very next room, ogres. Every single one of these rooms has monsters in it. Okay. And this is not uncommon through this adventure. This is what you get. Then I went and said, okay, well, what about like Keep on the Borderlands? And looking at this one, I see something similar. I see, okay, we got our guard room here as hobgoblins, then our next room has more hobgoblins. The storeroom has a guard in it. The next one has 2 hobgoblins. Then we get this great ugly creature, must be the hobgoblin chief, sorry, is the hobgoblin chief, and then more hobgoblins. So again, lots of, every single room has some sort of monster in it that you're having to deal with in some way. Then I fast forward and looked at Pathfinder, and I don't have a 3rd edition adventure, but Paizo was who published the 3rd edition adventures, and so Pathfinder kind of seemed like a good matchup for that. And you see the same thing. Every single one of these locations has different monsters in them that it describes and gives you all the stats for these monsters and gives you tactics and everything in basically every room. So what we see in 4th edition and the rooms that we have there with monsters in every single one of these rooms is really no different than what we would see in these other editions of the game. So this should not be a surprise to anybody that's looking at Keep on the Shadowfell. This is really pretty par for the course. Anybody that's picking up Keep on the Shadowfell and is coming from 3rd edition or 2nd edition or 1st edition, really what you're seeing here is about what you would see everywhere else. So I don't know why Keep on the Shadowfell and 4th edition has to be held to some different standard about what dungeon crawl encounter is supposed to be. So, and then I said to myself, all right, the last thing I'll look at is, about published adventures in general, and how do we assess the quality of a published adventure? Because, not every adventure is created equal. Some of them are going to be better than other ones. And it's always possible that, some people just don't like the adventure. And whether that's Elemental Evil or Keep on the Borderlands or Keep on the Shadowfell or any other one, they're not for everybody. Some will like them, some won't. But the thing that I keep thinking about is that when you run these adventures, how you run the adventure is going to be different at every single table that you're at. So I know that I've run the same adventure at multiple tables, and it is a very different experience. The thread is there that everybody follows like through the whole adventure, but the specifics of how it all plays out is going to be very different. Even every single encounter is different because you've got different characters, different classes, different abilities that everybody's using, and the players are going to approach things differently based on how they play the game. And even me as the same DM running all of those, I still run them differently because I'm adapting to the table itself and understanding what they want from the game. So the published adventure will play out very differently at every single table, every single time it's played. And so this game in itself is meant to be something that plays out differently based on those rules. And so even a published adventure will play out differently because it's always going to be tweaked to the taste of the table and to the dungeon master. And I look at this and I think to myself about a movie is a finished product and a book is a finished product. So when you look at these and you review them, you're looking at a finished product and saying, how was that product? How did they do with that? And assessing it on how it was. But a D&D adventure is more of an outline. It is a framework for how an adventure might run. And it's providing you with a collection of events and a particular setting and some of the things that you would need for this adventure to play out. But the implementation of that adventure is up to the DM and to the players at that table. And so the only measure that you have of whether the adventure was any good is whether the people at the table enjoyed it. And if you adapted that adventure to meet your needs and did whatever you needed to do and everybody had a great time with it, then that adventure was fine. And so to measure it strictly based on how it's written is a hard thing to do because rarely does a D&D adventure play out exactly the way that it's written on the page. There's usually always some sort of adjustments that go on for the table. And the measure of the quality of an adventure is really whether it provided the right framework, gave you the right, triggered your imagination and inspired you to write, to make a campaign for your table that they all enjoyed. And if it did that, then it succeeded at what it did. So that was my thoughts. And as I contemplated all those things, then I said to myself, I think 4th edition got it right. And I actually, in looking at this, I think the prior editions got it right. And so I think if you're coming from a prior edition and you're learning 4th edition, what you'll find is I think 4th edition stepped it up in making it even easier for the dungeon master, but it built on a lot of what was already there in the prior editions. And so the thing that really struck me is that I think about it from the standpoint of it's a lot easier to subtract than it is to add. And so if I have a piece of wood and I need to cut it and I don't cut off enough, then I can always go back and cut off a little more, and it's no big deal. But if I cut off too much and I have to add something back, well, I can't pick up all the sawdust off the floor and put it back on the board. I got to start with a new board, and it's a whole big thing. And this is where I think 4th edition really shines. And I think some of the earlier editions, were kind of laid the foundation for some of this, because, and I'll flip back over to look at the 4th edition, encounter layout. And this is the level of detail that you get here. When you're looking at a 4th edition encounter, you've got all of your monster stat blocks. You've got the setup with the what kind of perception checks you need. You've got some box text. You've got the map showing you where all the monsters are. You've got all the features. In the case, you got the tactics, and in some cases you'll have treasure that's going to be given out. Like here's a +1 magic wand that they're going to get. So you've got everything that you need here. And if you want to change that as the dungeon master, if they get to this location and you're like, you know what? We've just had a lot of combat, and me as the dungeon master, I don't feel that we need another combat encounter right here. It is super easy to subtract things from this encounter and make it different for your adventurers. You could turn any one of these monsters or all of these monsters into just NPCs who are non-combative, where the players can just talk to them, and you can have a social encounter with them. You could completely eliminate them entirely and not have them there at all. You could, if there's some treasure to be found, instead just put the treasure inside a treasure chest that's locked. These are trivial things that you can do. It's really easy to subtract the stuff and then just run this as not a combat. And if you look at these other adventures that came before, you could have the same thing in any of these. Just because there's monsters listed here doesn't mean you have to run that as a combat encounter. In some cases, the players might come up with a creative solution to get past this location without actually fighting those monsters, and you just avoid them. Or you as the DM, make a decision that changes the nature of that particular encounter, and you just simply say, all right, well, this one is supposed to have guards, this one is supposed to have fighters, I'm just not going to do that. Or I'm going to decide that these guards are wanting to surrender and they're not ones that we want to fight, or they've got some piece of information. It's really easy to just subtract that from the mix. Same with Keep on the Borderlands. Same with the this is Revenge of the Kobolds something for Pathfinder. So and that's what it's just really easy to subtract that. Now I'm gonna do a little bad mouthing of 5th edition. I don't really want to do that, but I will show you one of the failings in my mind of 5th edition is that if you look at the location, this is the haunted house from Curse of Strahd. If you look at it, you have a lot of locations on this map. There's a ton of locations, and they all have an entry on here, but most of them just describe the room. And, so like this spare bedroom is a web-filled room that contains a bed and a nightstand and rocking chair. And the spare bedroom has a room with a slender bed, a nightstand and stuff. You just get a description of it, but there's no other details. If you as the dungeon master decided that there needed to be some other obstacle for the players, you have to add to it. And that involves you figuring out what to add. Is that going to be a trap? Is it going to be a puzzle? Is it going to be monsters? What is it? You have nothing to work from here. At best, you might have maybe a wandering monster table that you can work from, and you just do a wandering monster. But there's nothing specific in there. You have to add to it. But if you look at these other adventures that came before, it's all about subtracting, and it's a lot easier. This is in essence the worst case scenario. If you're running Keep on the Shadowfell, every single location that you have in Keep on the Shadowfell, you are provided in the published adventure like the hardest, most difficult way that you could run this location. And if you as the dungeon master decide that that's not how you want to run it, then you're simply subtracting things from it. And that is something you can do on the fly. It's almost trivial in a way because you're just subtracting things, and that just makes it a lot easier. So that is where I think 4th edition kind of builds on what was done in the prior editions, because the prior editions were very similar in that they presented you with those worst case scenarios. I think 4th edition just did it a little bit better by giving you this really nice layout that made it very easy for the dungeon master to run these encounters. And then you can decide what, how you actually want to run it. And the players can decide what they want to do. And it's only ever going to be easier than what's written on the page. So that's my thought on those thoughts of that. The Keep on the Shadowfell was just way too much combat, and a little bit of the notion that 4th edition was just too much combat and it was nothing but combat and all those sorts of things. I feel like it was a lot more similar to the editions you would have been coming from than people would give it credit for. I am in no way saying that Keep on the Shadowfell is a perfect adventure. I think some tables will like it, some tables will not like it, just like some tables will like Keep on the Borderlands and other tables will not. It depends. If you don't feel that that's your cup of tea, then yeah, you may not like it. But I think it's disingenuous to hold it to a different standard than we did some of the other adventures and say that it was somehow so majorly different from these other adventures that came before it as published adventures. I don't see the differences there. It seems like it's very similar in the types of things that you're presented with, but you are presented with the information a lot more completely and in a way that makes it really easy for the dungeon master. And certainly, as the first adventure for 4th edition, with all of these cool combat rules that you get that you're going to want to make sure you get to try out, I think it does all this stuff just fine. I think, again, not perfect, but, as the first ever thing for 4th edition, I think it does a pretty good job at all of that. So, but that is my thoughts on that. That was my 4th edition Defender hat that I'm putting on. So let me know your thoughts on any of that down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to the channel, check out the newsletter, and until next time, take care.